Organ Lesson Series. Today's piece is a theme and 8 variations. And if that sounds a bit tedious, and let's face it, themes and variations can very easily be tedious, then these are the very opposite. These are glorious music, they're easy to play, they're easy to listen to, but more than anything else, they are inventive and at times real fun. And you can't get better than that in terms of variations. Just in case you're wondering where the Sebaldina comes from in the title of the aria, the title of the theme, then a little hint is that Pachelbel was organist in his home church at Nuremberg, the church dedicated to Saint Sebaldina. It was a job, incidentally, that he took in preference to a job offer from Oxford University, so it can't have been bad there either. Anyway, back to the music. I think one of the questions which we have to ask ourselves is, do we play all the variations at the same tempo, or do we set a new tempo for each variation individually? In the 18th century, there are good arguments to suggest that even in very long multi-movement pieces, even things like masses, oratorios, and so on, then there was a sense of beat which ran all the way through the music. People in the 18th century did have a very strong sense of beat and of tempo. Now, whether or not that is the case, it doesn't really matter here in this instance, but the main point is that I think people would have had such a relationship with an ongoing sense of beat that if it's at all possible in these variations to play them all with a consistent beat, a consistent tempo, then we should do so. And I believe that it is possible. So a few details. Articulation is going to be the usual differentiated non-legato that we're accustomed to from the 18th century. So it certainly doesn't want to be legato in a 19th century sense. Obviously, there is going to be a sense of connectivity, but at the same time, the individual notes will be emphasized and heightened by their own articulation. Another small detail here, in bar 4 there is a trill which is approached from the upper auxiliary. It's the usual problem again. What do we do with trills which are approached from above? In this particular instance, it isn't a great problem because the tempo is sufficiently slow, the movement of the music is sufficiently leisurely to allow us to tie the previous note over into the trill, and that makes a very good solution in this particular case. But looking further on in the piece, that's not always the case, and there is a very interesting question here about the southern German tradition. Should, in fact, trills be started from the note above? And there are, again, differing arguments going on, but there is quite a strong argument to suggest at least that the southern German composers and musicians were not so fixed on starting a trill from the note above. That is to say, it was at any rate optional to start them from the main note. And that becomes terribly relevant in this particular piece because there are a number of cases where it is quite simply impossible to start a trill from the note above. In variation 5, bar 68, the trill is preceded by a semiquaver on the note above. And there it's going to be clumsy, if not impossible, to replay that note as the start of the trill. It just really doesn't quite work. But even more convincingly, there are a number of occasions where the starting a trill on the note above would create parallel fifths or parallel octaves in a most open and obvious way, which are quite plainly impossible. So the end of variation 6, that's bar 84, I think, that would create parallel octaves if we start the trill on the note above, and very, very obvious parallel octaves. Similarly, in the middle of variation 4, there is a place where starting on the note above would create, again, very open parallel fifths. They just don't work. So there we must start the trill on the main note. There's probably not a huge amount to say about the individual variations. So variation 1, for example, starts with this lovely rising figure. And there we really want to aim for the highest note in a way which is perhaps more important than strictly metrical. Variation 5 has got this remarkable figure that really is more ornament than melody. It's not a melody at all, the alternating notes. It really is just a rhythmic figure. It helps very much to use the same pair of fingers each time. I use 2 and 3, but you use whatever you find convenient. And the number of alternations we don't necessarily need to keep exact count of. It's not going to be utterly metrical. The main thing is here that it's going to be a rhythmic interest. So it is effectively an ornament. It's like a trill played on 2 notes, which are a minor third apart. And obviously there's no call at all to be legato between the various wiggles. I'm playing that variation today on a 4-foot flute, just to heighten, just to emphasize the quirkiness of it all. That may be a good idea, or perhaps not. I'm not sure, but we'll see anyway how it works. So speaking of registration, there's obviously going to need to be variety here. This is a set of variations, and one of the means of variety is in terms of registration. But at the same time, this piece is a very restrained, very beautiful piece. We're going to be looking for probably fluty kinds of tones. And certainly we don't want, even in the last variation where things get a little bit more energetic, we don't want to be heading into the mixtures and trumpets area. This isn't a really grand, demonstrative, noisy piece. This is more of a beautiful and actually rather fun piece of music. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I do, and good luck with playing it.